Hello and welcome back. I wanted to do this quick little addendum lecture on a specific issue when it comes to editing, and that is repeating words. There's nothing that can be more annoying or boring for a reader than to see repeated words over and over again. And in this section, I want to propose to you that you might even want to make an editorial scan just for repeated words. Why not scan your document more than once or incorporate it into your self-editing process? And I guarantee you that any copy editor that you hire will be doing this for you. So let me explain what I'm talking about. First of all, an example of word repetition. Listen to this. Fred stepped inside the house. It was cold inside the house. He couldn't remember the last time he'd set foot inside the house, but the house appeared barren. Notice that house shows up 4 times in just 3 short sentences. That is really repetitious and boring. Now, consider this sentence instead. Fred stepped inside his home. I used home instead of house. It's actually more descriptive of what this structure is. It's not only a house, it's his home. It was cold inside the structure. Speaking of structure, I've now replaced house with structure to get a different word in there so that the words don't repeat. He couldn't remember the last time he'd set foot inside the house. Finally, here's house. But it appeared barren. And then here I eliminate the word house by using a conjunction and putting the sentence together. So I'm going to talk about the techniques for removing repetitive words and streamlining your writing. Here they are, basically. The first thing I want to talk about is when you intentionally repeat words, and it's typically for emphasis. So there are cases where you actually want to repeat words. Here's a technique for removing repetitive words. Just get rid of them. Sometimes they're not needed at all, and you just get rid of words. I'm going to show you an example of that. And then we're going to look at replacing repeated words with pronouns. So people's names and stuff you can replace with he, and you can replace something with it. So objects with it, and so on to get rid of repeated words. And then I'm going to show you when you might actually want to repeat words, primarily when you're breaking paragraphs and it's been a long time since you've explained what the pronoun he is associated with Steve, let's say, and it's been a while and you're talking between Steve and Ben. You need to make sure by repeating Steve or Ben who you're talking about. You'll see when we get to the example. And then I want to talk about using synonyms. These are words that have the same meaning as a word that you're replacing them with. Okay, so let's look at each one of these one at a time. Here's number 1. When you might want to intentionally reuse a word or phrase. For emphasis, check out the emphasis in this paragraph. It was the house to blame, nothing but the house. It was the house that had put them into debt. It was the house that had caused them to fight. For all their woes, it was the house to blame. Now, the house is repeated many times in just a few sentences, but notice how you're using it to emphasize the house. That devil house. That was the cause of the whole problem. So sometimes you intentionally want to repeat words. Most of the time, you don't. So let's look at the first technique for removing repetitive words. For example, he was a champion fisherman. He always caught the best fish, for example. Notice how for example is, first of all, really annoying because it's repeated, and also because it really isn't needed. How about he was a champion fisherman? He always caught the best fish. Okay, that's much more streamlined and clean. And we made it there by getting rid of some repeated words. Now, you could argue this rule. Really, you should get rid of the words whether they're repeated or not, so it's not really a repetition example, but I wanted to show it to you anyway. Next, replacing repeated words with pronouns. So replace a pronoun is like, it's something that replaces an existing words, like table. You could replace it with it. Or Stephen, you could replace with he. Or Beth, replace with she. So this kind of streamlines things much better. Consider the original paragraph. Stephen walked into the house. Stephen set his keys on the kitchen counter. Stephen then began to survey his surroundings. What about this instead? Stephen walked into the house. He set his keys, notice he is replacing Stephen here, on the kitchen counter and began to survey his surroundings. His is, and then we got rid of the third Stephen just by conjoining via a conjunction, an and, two sentences together, so we didn't have to repeat who we were talking about. So this is one of the ways to do it. I actually showed you using pronouns and then using a conjunction of a sentence to get rid of the repetition of the subject. Wow. Next, we want to look at when it is good to repeat words. Repeat words and phrases after a paragraph break or in some situation where it could become confusing to the reader as to what the pronoun is referencing. For instance, if you're have a conversation between Steve and Ben, and you say, okay, Steve did this, and then he did this, and he did this, and he did this. Paragraph break. Now he did this. Who are we talking about as far as he? Are we talking about Ben or are we talking about Steve? You usually find that at paragraph breaks, right? A paragraph about Steve is going to be about Steve and what he does. So he pretty much owns that paragraph. You can use Steve and he interchangeably within the paragraph. But once you hit a new one, what about Ben? Is it about Ben or Steve? So you want to repeat, even if it's about Steve, say Steve did this. Steve, in the second paragraph, say we're still talking about Steve. So you want to repeat words when it can become unclear who you're talking about. And that usually happens as a passage of time or at a paragraph break when you're using pronouns to reference a character. Now, finally, I wanted to look at using synonyms. This is another option. A synonym is a word that is the same as another word. And actually, Word will assist you. Word, meaning Microsoft Word, and I'm going to show you 2016, will assist you in doing this. So let's go over and take a look at Word Assist with synonyms. Here I am in Word, editing a document, and I come down maybe to the word different here. I set my point in it. Now I right-click, and notice what happens. Up pops the context menu for being in the editor. And down here I can come to synonyms. And if I roll over that, notice all the synonyms over on the right. These are words that I can replace different with. So what of many diverse editors? Maybe instead of different editors, I want to say diverse editors. I just click on diverse and notice the word different changes to diverse. Notice this too. If I click on the word and I right-click and come down to synonyms and then hit thesaurus, it opens up a tab with all kinds of different synonyms. So here's the different adjectives. Here's the varied synonyms. So I can pick any of these. So I can say unlike. So I can pick words from there as well. So this is a way to find synonyms. And synonyms are just different words for the same word. Notice earlier where I talked about him walking into the house and walking into the structure. Structure is a synonym for house, so I could just use a different word in my original example that started out this lecture. So that's what a synonym is. Use those to replace repeated words. So we talked about all these techniques. First of all, when you want to intentionally repeat a word for emphasis, removing just unneeded words, they could be repetitions or not, replacing repeated words with pronouns. So replace table with it, replace Steve with he or his. And when to repeat words, when your pronoun is kind of losing its association with its original target. You need to repeat the original target like Steve or table to get that reference back again. And then finally, using synonyms and actually using Word to help you with that. Next up is the original lecture from this course, Editing Resources. I'll see you there.